The autumn leaves crunched beneath Sean Connery's polished Oxfords as he approached Rosewood Manor, an elegant Victorian mansion that had been converted into Edinburgh's most respected retirement home for entertainment industry professionals. At 79, Sean had received the invitation 3 weeks prior, a handwritten note from the facility's director requesting his presence at their monthly Legends lunch, where current residents shared stories and wisdom with visiting colleagues. "Mr. Connery, thank you so much for coming," greeted Margaret Campbell, the facility's director, as she met him at the ornate entrance. At 55, Margaret carried herself with the practiced warmth of someone who had spent 2 decades caring for people whose names had once graced theater marquees and film credits around the world. "Please, just Sean," he replied, removing his wool coat and surveying the tastefully appointed lobby. Original movie posters from the 1940S and 1950S lined the walls, interspersed with black and white photographs of theatrical productions and award ceremonies from decades past. "Our residents are quite excited," Margaret explained as they walked through corridors that managed to feel both institutional and homey. "We have 12 current residents, all of whom had significant careers in entertainment. Some of them worked during the same era you were starting out." Sean nodded, though he felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach. The same sensation that had accompanied every hospital visit, every charity event, every encounter with the practical realities of aging that he himself was navigating with increasing awareness. "I should mention," Margaret added as they approached the main dining room, "that several of our residents are dealing with various stages of memory loss. Some days are better than others, but they all have moments of remarkable clarity, especially when discussing their professional experiences." The dining room was bathed in soft afternoon light streaming through tall windows that overlooked carefully maintained gardens. Round tables for 4 were arranged throughout the space, each set with proper china and fresh flowers, but it was the residents themselves who commanded Sean's attention. Men and women in their 70s, 80s, and beyond, some in wheelchairs, others moving with careful deliberation, all of them carrying themselves with the particular dignity that comes from a lifetime in the spotlight. "Everyone," Margaret announced, her voice carrying across the room, "I'd like you to meet our guest for today's lunch, Sean Connery." The reaction was immediate and varied. Some faces lit up with instant recognition and delight. Others showed the polite interest of people trying to place a familiar face. A few seemed momentarily confused, caught between present reality and memories from decades past. "Sean Bloody Connery!" exclaimed a voice from the nearest table. The speaker was a woman in her mid-80s, her white hair perfectly styled despite her frail appearance, her eyes sharp with intelligence and humor. "Margaret, dear, you didn't tell us we were getting 7 for lunch." "Vivian Shaw," Margaret said quietly to Sean. "West End musical theater for 40 years. Still remembers every lyric from every show she ever did, but sometimes forgets what she had for breakfast." Sean approached Vivian's table with genuine warmth. "Miss Shaw, it's an honor to meet you. Margaret tells me you had an extraordinary career in musical theater." "Extraordinary is one word for it," Vivian replied with a theatrical flourish. "Exhausting, exhilarating, occasionally lucrative, and ultimately addictive. That's theater for you. Please, sit down. I want to hear everything about how you managed to make James Bond Scottish without anyone complaining." A As Sean settled into the chair beside Vivian, he became aware of the other residents at the table. Across from him sat Harold Morrison, a character actor whose face Sean recognized from dozens of British films from the 1960s and 1970s. To Vivian's left was Dorothy Ellis, a costume designer whose work had graced some of the most memorable productions of London's golden age. "You know," Harold said slowly, his voice carrying the careful cadence of someone working through cognitive fog, "I think I auditioned for one of your Bond films, though I can't remember which one now." "That's quite possible," Sean replied gently. "I remember those audition days. Seemed like half of London's actors came through at some point." "Did you ever imagine," Dorothy asked, her hand shaking slightly as she lifted her teacup, "when you were starting out, that the work would last this long, that people would still be talking about those films 50 years later?" Sean considered the question carefully. "Honestly, I was just trying to get from one day to the next, one job to the next. I don't think any of us really understood what we were creating." That's the funny thing about this business, Vivian interjected. You spend your whole career chasing the next role, the next opportunity, thinking that's where the meaning lies. It's only later that you realize the meaning was in the work itself, in the people you worked with, in the moments when everything came together perfectly. Do you miss it? Harold asked suddenly, his momentary clarity sharp and focused. The work? I mean, the feeling of being needed, of being at the center of something important. The question caught Sean off guard with its directness. He looked around the table at these three people who had given their lives to the same craft he had devoted himself to, who now found themselves in the strange position of being living repositories of an entertainment era that younger generations knew only through archives and retrospectives. Every day, Sean answered honestly, not just the glamour or the recognition, but the sense of purpose, the feeling that what you're doing matters, that you're contributing to something larger than yourself. I dream about it sometimes, Dorothy said softly. I'll wake up thinking I have a fitting scheduled or that I need to finish alterations for opening night. For a few minutes, I'm 35 again and completely essential to the success of a production. Those dreams feel more real than this sometimes, don't they? Vivian asked, gesturing around the dining room with a rueful smile. Sean felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of shared experience that transcended the differences in their current circumstances. Yes, they do. The hardest part, Harold continued, his voice growing stronger as his memories sharpened, isn't being forgotten by the public. That's natural, expected. The hardest part is feeling like you're forgetting yourself, like the person who could command a stage or remember 50 pages of dialogue was someone else entirely. But that person wasn't someone else, Sean said firmly. That person was you, is you. The skills might be rusty, the opportunities might be fewer, but the heart of who you are as an artist, that doesn't disappear. You really believe that? Dorothy asked, her eyes bright with hope and skepticism in equal measure. I have to believe it, Sean replied, because the alternative, believing that we are nothing more than our most recent accomplishment, our current capacity, is too terrible to accept. Vivian reached across the table and placed her weathered hand over Sean's. You know what I've learned living here? Some of the most beautiful performances happen in this dining room. Mrs. Henderson in the corner there, she has Alzheimer's, hasn't recognized her own daughter in 2 years. But yesterday, she recited the entire balcony scene from Romeo and Juliet, word perfect, with more passion than I've seen from actors half her age. Sean followed her gaze to see an elderly woman sitting alone, staring out the window with vacant eyes. The words were still there, Vivian continued, hidden maybe, but not gone. Shakespeare had become part of her DNA, more essential than recent memory. That's remarkable, Sean said, and meant it. It made me realize that maybe what we're really afraid of isn't losing our memories or our abilities, Harold said thoughtfully. Maybe what we're afraid of is losing the sense that our lives had meaning, that the work we did mattered. But it did matter, Sean said with sudden intensity. All of it mattered. Every performance, every role, every moment when you made someone in the audience feel less alone in the world, it all mattered tremendously. Even the failures? Dorothy asked. Even the roles we were terrible in, the productions that closed after 3 nights, the films that never found an audience? Especially those, Sean replied without hesitation, because they taught us resilience, humility, the understanding that success is temporary, but the commitment to the craft is what defines us. Conversation was interrupted by Margaret's gentle announcement that lunch would be served shortly. As plates of carefully prepared food were distributed, Sean found himself deeply moved by the dignity with which these residents navigated their current reality. The way Vivian helped Harold steady his glass, the patience Dorothy showed when struggling to remember a name, the collective understanding that they were all traveling the same difficult path together. Can I tell you something? Vivian said as they began eating. When I first moved here 3 years ago, I was furious. Furious at my children for insisting I couldn't live alone anymore. Furious at my body for betraying me. Furious at the world for moving on without me. What changed? Sean asked. I realized I was looking at this all wrong. I thought moving here meant my story was over, but really it just meant I was starting a new chapter, a different kind of performance, if you will. What kind of performance? The performance of graceful aging, of maintaining dignity in the face of loss, of finding new ways to connect with people, new ways to matter, She smiled, and Sean could see traces of the vibrant performer she had once been. It's actually one of the most challenging roles I've ever taken on. Harold nodded slowly. The audience is smaller now, he said, usually just the staff, other residents, the occasional visitor like yourself. But the performance still matters, maybe matters more, because it's so much more honest. Honest how? Sean asked. Because there's nothing left to prove, Dorothy explained. No career to build, no reputation to protect. We can finally just be ourselves, not the version of ourselves we think people want to see, but who we actually are. Sean felt tears prickling behind his eyes. That's terrifying and liberating at the same time. Exactly, Vivian said with a laugh. It's the role we've been preparing for our entire lives without realizing it. As lunch progressed, Sean found himself drawn into story after story, tales of theatrical triumphs and disasters, of famous co-stars and forgotten friendships, of the peculiar challenges and unexpected joys of a life spent in service to entertainment. But more than the stories themselves, he was moved by the way these three people had found meaning in their current circumstances, had transformed what could have been bitter endings into hopeful new beginnings. Before you go, Harold said as the meal was winding down, can I ask you something? Of course. How do you want to be remembered? Not just for the films or the fame, but for who you were as a person. John considered the question for a long moment. I think I'd like to be remembered as someone who took the work seriously, but didn't take himself too seriously. Someone who understood that the real privilege wasn't the recognition or the money, but the opportunity to spend a lifetime doing something he loved with people he respected. That's a fine legacy, Dorothy said approvingly. What about you? Sean asked. How do you want to be remembered? Vivian spoke first, as someone who brought joy to people, even when she was struggling to find it herself. Harold followed, as someone who showed up even when showing up was difficult. Dorothy concluded, as someone who understood that beauty matters, even in small things, even when no one else notices. Sean felt overwhelmed by the simple profundity of their answers. Those are beautiful ambitions. They're not ambitions anymore, Vivian said gently. They're choices we make every day. Every morning when we get up and decide how we're going to face whatever this day brings. As Sean prepared to leave Rosewood Manor, each of the residents at his table pressed something into his hands. Harold gave him a photograph from a 1967 film they had both appeared in, though neither could remember which one. Dorothy presented him with a small embroidered handkerchief she had made herself, and Vivian offered a sheet of music from one of her most famous roles. Thank you, Sean said, genuinely moved. This afternoon has been more meaningful than you could possibly know. Come back, Vivian said simply, not for a special occasion or a publicity event. Just come back because you want to continue the conversation. I will, Sean promised and meant it. Walking back to his car through the crisp autumn air, Sean felt fundamentally changed by the afternoon's experience. He had come to Rosewood Manor expecting to provide comfort and inspiration to residents who had seen better days. Instead, he had encountered three people who had discovered something he was only beginning to understand, that the measure of a life isn't found in its peak moments of success, but in the grace and wisdom with which one navigates its inevitable transitions. 2 weeks later, Sean would return to Rosewood Manor, not as a celebrity making a charitable appearance, but as someone seeking the company of people who understood both the heights and the challenges of a life spent in performance. He would begin visiting regularly, bringing books to read aloud, sharing stories from his own career, and slowly understanding that the most important role he might ever play was simply that of a friend who showed up consistently for people who needed to know they still mattered. It wasn't just a retirement home visit. It was the discovery that sometimes the most profound wisdom comes from people who have learned that endings aren't endings at all, but simply transformations into something different and possibly even more meaningful than what came before.